The weathered cabin stood silent against the backdrop of pine-covered mountains, its wooden bones creaking with secrets of bygone days. 12-year-old Thomas traced his fingers along the uneven floorboards of his grandfather's living room, feeling the stories embedded in each groove and knot. Something had always felt different about the corner near the stone fireplace, a hollow sound, a slight give beneath his weight that the rest of the floor didn't share. As evening shadows stretched across the room, his grandfather's heavy footsteps echoed on the porch outside. Thomas pressed down on the odd floorboard, and for the first time it shifted. Beneath it lay not dirt or foundation, but a small brass handle attached to what appeared to be a trapdoor. The floorboard slid back into place just as the cabin door swung open. Thomas scrambled to his feet, heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Dinner in 10, Grandfather Henry announced, hanging his worn canvas jacket on the hook by the door. His weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, lingered on the spot where Thomas had been kneeling. Thomas had been at the cabin for 3 weeks now, sent to the mountains while his parents sorted out their separation. 3 weeks of sparse conversation and long silences. 3 weeks of wondering why his mother had insisted he stay with a grandfather he barely knew. "Find anything interesting today?" Henry asked, his voice casual as he moved to the kitchen. Thomas swallowed hard. "Just exploring." A photograph hung crookedly on the wall caught his attention, one he hadn't noticed before. In it, a much younger version of his grandfather stood alongside strange figures dressed in clothes Thomas couldn't quite place, not modern but not exactly old-fashioned either. "Who are they?" Thomas asked, pointing to the photograph. Henry glanced up, a flash of something alarm crossing his features before disappearing behind his usual stoic expression. "Old friends from a long time ago." He turned away, effectively ending the conversation. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The brass handle beneath the floorboards called to him like a whisper. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of tunnels stretching deep into the mountain and voices speaking in languages he almost understood. Morning brought the smell of bacon and coffee. Thomas found his grandfather at the kitchen table, a mug clasped between calloused hands. "I saw what you found yesterday," Henry said without preamble. Thomas froze, pancake halfway to his mouth. "That door stays closed. You understand me?" The old man's voice wasn't angry, it was afraid. "Some things aren't meant to be disturbed." "What's down there?" Thomas asked, curiosity overwhelming his apprehension. Henry sighed, suddenly looking much older than his 72 years. "Trouble, history, things you're not ready for." "Is it something illegal?" Thomas ventured. A short, humorless laugh escaped his grandfather. "No, nothing like that. It's complicated." Throughout the day, Henry kept Thomas busy with chores, chopping wood, fixing a loose gutter, cleaning the shed. But Thomas's mind remained fixed on the trapdoor and his grandfather's evasiveness. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues, Thomas tried again. "The people in town tell stories," he said carefully, "about this mountain, about things that don't make sense." Henry remained silent, rocking slowly in his chair. Mrs. Abernathy at the general store said her grandfather used to talk about lights in the forest, and people who appeared and disappeared. "People talk," Henry muttered. "Doesn't make it true. She said our family has always been different, that you know things others don't." The rocking stopped. Henry fixed Thomas with a penetrating gaze. "Your father never told you anything about this place? About our family?" Thomas shook his head. "Dad never talks about growing up here. He left as soon as he could. That's all I know." Something like grief flickered across Henry's face. Robert had his reasons. He seemed to be weighing a decision, conflict evident in the deep lines of his face. Finally he spoke again. "That door leads to responsibility, Thomas. One your father rejected. One I've carried alone for 30 years. What kind of responsibility? The kind that changes you forever. Henry stood with effort, joints creaking. Your grandmother came from somewhere else. And when she did, it connected our worlds. Someone has to watch the doorway. Doorway to where? Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But Henry was already walking inside. Conversation over. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day. That night, as clouds gathered around the mountain peaks and distant thunder rumbled, Thomas lay awake. His grandfather's warnings only strengthened his resolve. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow night, when Henry fell into his deep, snoring sleep, Thomas would open the trapdoor and discover what secret his family had been keeping for generations. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight. Thomas counted each resonant tone, lying motionless in his bed, until the final echo faded into silence. Outside, the wind whispered through pine branches, a natural symphony that had lulled Henry into deep sleep an hour before. Thomas slipped from beneath his quilt, wincing as the old floorboards creaked beneath his weight. He paused, listening. His grandfather's steady snoring continued undisturbed from the bedroom down the hall. Carefully, Thomas retrieved the flashlight he'd hidden beneath his pillow and padded barefoot through the darkened cabin. Moonlight filtered through curtained windows, casting long shadows across familiar furniture now transformed into mysterious silhouettes. He reached the spot near the fireplace and knelt down, running his fingers along the edges of the floorboard until he found the slight depression that allowed him to lift it. With a gentle tug, the brass handle revealed itself once more. Thomas took a deep breath, steadying his nerves, and pulled. The trapdoor opened with surprising ease, as if recently oiled. A cool draft wafted upward, carrying a scent Thomas couldn't identify, something earthy and ancient, mixed with a faint metallic tang. The beam of his flashlight revealed a narrow wooden staircase descending into darkness. Swallowing hard, Thomas began his descent. The stairs were solid, but worn in the center, evidence of countless passages over many years. At the bottom, the space opened into a small room with walls of fitted stone, not a crude cellar but a chamber built with purpose and skill. His flashlight beam danced across the contents. A desk covered with maps and journals, shelves lined with strange artifacts and books, a trunk in the corner, and against the far wall, something that made Thomas's breath catch. Another door, this one crafted of a dark wood he'd never seen before, inlaid with symbols that seemed to shift when he looked at them directly. Thomas approached the desk first. The maps showed familiar landscapes, the mountain range, the valley below, but with markings and notations in an elegant script he couldn't decipher. Several journals were stacked neatly, their leather bindings cracked with age. He opened the topmost one, finding pages filled with the same flowing script, interrupted occasionally by intricate diagrams. The trunk called to him next. Inside he found clothing unlike any he'd seen before, not quite modern, not quite historical, with fastenings and patterns that seemed both foreign and somehow familiar. Beneath the garments lay a wooden box, ornately carved with the same shifting symbols as the door. Thomas lifted it carefully. The box was heavier than its size suggested, and warm to the touch. A small brass lock secured the lid, but as Thomas examined it, he noticed it was already undone. He hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, lay a key unlike any Thomas had ever seen. Crafted from a metal that gleamed with an almost golden hue, it featured a complex head formed of interlacing designs and symbols that matched those on the door. Thomas reached for it, his fingertips tingling as they neared the metal. A low, gentle humming filled the room the moment he touched the key. Not alarming, but persistent, like the distant buzz of power lines or the vibration of a tuning fork. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls, from the strange door, perhaps from the key itself. Thomas slipped the key into his pocket, the humming diminishing but not disappearing entirely. He moved toward the mysterious door, drawn by an inexplicable certainty that the key would fit its lock. Before he could reach it, a sound from above froze him in place, the distinctive creak of his grandfather's bedroom door opening, a floorboard groaning under weight, heart hammering. Thomas quickly closed the trunk and returned the journal to its exact position. The humming grew more insistent as he approached the stairs, as if urging him to stay, to explore further, to open the second door. Instead, Thomas ascended the steps as quietly as possible, pulled the trapdoor closed behind him, and replaced the floorboard. He barely made it back to his room before he heard his grandfather's heavy tread in the hallway. Diving beneath his covers, flashlight hidden once more, Thomas feigned sleep. The bedroom door creaked open, a sliver of hallway light spilling across his bed. He kept his breathing deep, and even as his grandfather stood silently in the doorway for what seemed an eternity, finally, the door closed. Footsteps retreated. In the darkness, Thomas withdrew the key from his pocket. Even without light, he could feel the intricate patterns under his fingertips, and the gentle humming continued, like a secret being whispered directly into his mind. Morning arrived with thin sunlight filtering through pine branches outside Thomas's window. He had barely slept, the strange key a warm presence beneath his pillow, its gentle humming a lullaby, just at the edge of hearing. At the breakfast table, Henry placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast before Thomas, with unusual care. His grandfather's face was drawn, deep creases framing his mouth as he lowered himself into the chair opposite. "You went down there last night." It wasn't a question. Thomas's fork clattered against his plate. "How did you?" "The door knows when it's been opened," Henry said simply. "And I've been guarding it long enough to feel the change," his eyes fixed on Thomas with unexpected intensity. "Did you take something?" The key seemed to pulse beneath Thomas's pajama pocket. He considered lying, but something in his grandfather's gaze made deception impossible. Slowly, he withdrew the key and placed it on the table between them. Henry closed his eyes briefly, a long breath escaping him. Of course it would be that. Of course it would choose you. Choose me. It's just a key. A humorless smile touched Henry's lips. "Nothing down there is just anything, Thomas." The old man reached for the key, his fingers hovering just above its surface. "Did you hear it?" The humming. Thomas nodded. "And did you try the other door?" "No. I heard you getting up." Relief visibly washed over Henry's features. He picked up the key, his movements deliberate, respectful. The humming grew louder, audible even to Thomas, from across the table. "I should have known this would happen," Henry murmured, more to himself than to Thomas. "Your grandmother always said bloodlines matter, that some doors can only be opened by the right hands." He stood abruptly. "Finish your breakfast. There are things you need to see. Things I should have shown you from the beginning." 30 minutes later, they stood before the open trapdoor. Henry descended first, moving with surprising agility for a man his age. The hidden room seemed different in daylight streaming down from above, less mysterious, more like a well-organized study. Henry moved to a shelf and retrieved a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by decades of handling. "Started this the day I found the door. 50 years ago now." He offered it to Thomas. "Most of it's encoded, protection against prying eyes, but you should be able to read it, given time, given practice." Thomas opened the journal to a random page. The script was similar to what he'd seen last night, but now he could almost make out patterns, a logic to the symbols that hadn't been apparent before. "It's our family's responsibility," Henry continued, moving toward the second door. "Has been since your grandmother crossed over from where?" Henry's fingers traced the symbols on the door. "From the other side, from Eldamere." He glanced back at Thomas. "That's what they call it anyway. Their world adjacent to ours, but not quite touching except at certain points. Thresholds, they call them. This mountain happens to contain one. You're saying Grandma was from another world?" "Met her when I was about your father's age. I was exploring these woods, found a cave I'd never noticed before. Inside was a door much like this one. I opened it out of curiosity. A small smile softened Henry's weathered face. Your grandmother was on the other side, equally surprised to find me. She was a threshold guardian for her people, just as I became one for ours. He turned fully to Thomas now, his expression grave. When a guardian from one side meets a guardian from another, it creates a bond, a connection. Sometimes that connection becomes more. Your grandmother chose to stay in our world, but that choice came with responsibilities. Henry held up the key. This is a guardian's key, one of a pair. Your grandmother had its twin. The key's humming intensified as if recognizing its mention. These keys don't just open doors, Thomas. They maintain balance. Keep both worlds healthy and separate, except for controlled crossings. He placed the key in Thomas's palm, closing the boy's fingers around it. The key responding to you means what I've suspected since you arrived. You have the potential to be a guardian, like your grandmother, like me. What about Dad? Why didn't he? Your father wanted no part of this life, Henry said, a shadow crossing his face. Can't say I blame him. Being a guardian means sacrifice, secrecy, responsibility most people wouldn't understand. He sighed deeply. I had hoped, but no matter. The key has chosen you now. Thomas stared at the key in his hand, feeling its gentle vibration spreading up his arm. What does that mean? What am I supposed to do with it? Learn, Henry said simply. Learn everything I can teach you, because whether you want it or not, Thomas, you're part of this now, and the balance of two worlds may depend on what you do next. Days melted into a new routine. Mornings spent in the world Thomas had always known, chopping wood, helping with repairs around the cabin, learning to track animals through the forest. Afternoons devoted to a world he was just discovering, studying his grandfather's journals, memorizing symbols, learning the history of two realms connected by accident and maintained by design. Balance is everything, Henry explained one afternoon, as they sat at the desk in the hidden room. Think of our worlds as two sides of a scale. Too much influence from either side, and both suffer. Thomas ran his fingers over a page of intricate diagrams. But why does it need guardians? Why can't the doors just stay closed? Henry opened a drawer and removed a small brass compass. Unlike ordinary compasses, this one featured 8 cardinal points instead of 4, and the needle occasionally swung toward directions Thomas was certain didn't exist. Because the boundaries are not fixed, Henry said, placing the compass before Thomas. They shift, thin. Sometimes new thresholds appear where none existed before. Without guardians to monitor them, people could wander through accidentally, causing panic, disruption. Has that happened before? More times than the history books mention. Henry tapped a symbol in the journal. This marks a breach incident from 1897. A shepherd in Wales followed a stray lamb through a temporary threshold. 3 days later, an expedition from Eldamere returned him safely, but not before he'd told half the village about the fairy realm. Became a local legend. Thomas picked up the compass, watching the needle quiver between northwest and a direction that felt like it should have a name but didn't. So what does this do? Helps locate thresholds. When you feel that pull, that direction that isn't quite north or east, or any direction you recognize, that's where you'll find a thinning place. Henry's eyes crinkled at the corners. Your grandmother made it for me when we were first married. Said even a guardian sometimes needs help finding his way home. Thomas practiced with the compass for an hour, learning to sense the subtle differences between ordinary directions and the elsewhere that occasionally registered. By late afternoon, he could consistently identify when the needle indicated a potential threshold. Good, Henry nodded approvingly. You have your grandmother's sensitivity. It took me months to develop that awareness. So are there other thresholds nearby, besides the one under the cabin? A few. Most are dormant, accessible only at certain times or under specific conditions. Henry's expression grew serious. Which brings us to an important rule: never cross a threshold without preparation or permission. Some lead to dangerous places, others might close behind you, leaving you stranded. As dusk approached, they returned upstairs. Henry prepared a simple dinner, while Thomas attempted to translate a page from the journal. The encoded script was becoming more familiar, though he still struggled with certain passages. I think this part talks about something called the Crossing Festival, Thomas ventured, looking up from his work at the kitchen table. Henry nodded, stirring a pot of stew. Annual celebration in Eldermere. One of the few times ordinary citizens are permitted near the threshold. Your grandmother missed it terribly. A shadow crossed his face. We attended once, after we were married. Beautiful ceremony. Lanterns floating in the air, without any visible support. Music unlike anything in our world. Why only once? Complications arose. Henry's tone made it clear the subject was closed. He ladled stew into bowls. Tomorrow, if you're ready, we might make a short visit to the other side, just to the Guardian's outpost. Nothing further. Thomas nearly dropped his spoon. Really? We can actually go through, with proper precautions. The outpost is neutral territory, designed for Guardians from both sides to meet safely. Henry gave him a stern look. But only if you can recite the entry protocols without error, and only if you promise to stay close to me at all times. That night, Thomas could barely sleep. He practiced the entry protocols under his breath, determined to prove himself ready. The Guardian's key hummed softly from its place on the nightstand, its pitch changing subtly, as if responding to his excitement. Just before dawn, Thomas awoke from a vivid dream. He'd been standing in a meadow beneath an impossibly violet sky, watching creatures of light dance between trees with silver bark. The details faded quickly, but the feeling remained, a sense of recognition, as if he'd been seeing a memory rather than a dream. The key's humming had grown louder, almost eager. Thomas picked it up, warm against his palm, and whispered to it as if it could understand. Soon, we'll cross over soon. Recite the protocols once more, Henry instructed, standing before the strange door in the underground chamber. Thomas took a deep breath. Announce your intention to the threshold. Present the Guardian's key. Turn clockwise to enter, counterclockwise to exit. Sack the greeting of peace upon arrival. Request permission before proceeding beyond the outpost. And the most important rule, never reveal the exact location of our threshold to anyone, even other Guardians. Henry nodded approvingly. Good. Remember, what you're about to see may be overwhelming. Different rules govern Eldermere. Different physics, different concepts of time. Stay close. He gestured for Thomas to approach the door. The key in Thomas's hand hummed with increasing intensity, almost eager. You must open it, Henry explained. The key has chosen you. It needs to recognize the threshold under your command. Nervousness fluttered in Thomas's stomach as he stepped forward. The key seemed to grow warmer, pulling toward the door as if magnetized. He inserted it into the lock, a perfect fit. The humming synchronized with his heartbeat. Turn, Henry whispered. Thomas rotated the key clockwise. The lock mechanism made no sound, but he felt something shift, not just in the door but in the air around them, in the very fabric of reality. The symbols on the door's surface began to glow with a soft blue light. I intend to cross as a Guardian. With a Guardian in training, Thomas announced, the formal words feeling strange on his tongue. The door swung inward silently, revealing not stone or earth as logic would dictate, but a small circular room constructed of pale wood. A single figure stood waiting, an elderly woman with silver hair bound in intricate braids, wearing robes of deep green embroidered with familiar symbols. The greeting, Henry murmured behind him. Peace between worlds, balance in all things, Thomas recited, bowing slightly as he'd been taught. The woman's face crinkled in a smile. Peace returned, young Guardian. Your grandfather has told me much about you. Her accent was subtle but distinctive, certain syllables resonating differently than Thomas had ever heard. Eldermere oversees the outpost on the Eldermere side, Henry explained, stepping through the threshold to stand beside Thomas. She's been a guardian longer than I have, though not by much, Mira chuckled. Your grandfather was just a few years older than you when he first stumbled through. Caused quite a commotion. The outpost was sparsely furnished. A table, some chairs, shelves lined with books and instruments similar to those in Henry's hidden room. Windows looked out onto a landscape that made Thomas's breath catch. The sky was a deep shade of indigo, even though it seemed to be daytime. Trees with silver-white bark and foliage in shades of teal and purple surrounded a small collection of buildings constructed of stone and wood. People moved about, appearing human at first glance, but with a grace of movement that seemed almost choreographed. Welcome to Viridian Outpost, Mira said, following his gaze. One of 7 guardian stations surrounding the central village. It's beautiful, Thomas managed. Today is auspicious for your first crossing, Mira noted. The council has convened for the seasonal review. They would like to meet your grandfather's successor. Henry's eyebrows rose. The full council? That's unusual for an introduction. Mira's expression turned serious. These are unusual times, Henry. The boundaries have been restless. Thomas tore his attention from the window. Restless how? The elder guardians exchanged meaningful glances. Fluctuations, Mira finally said, thinning where there should be stability. The council is concerned. She moved to a cabinet and withdrew a small silver object, shaped like an acorn. For you, young guardian, a token of passage. She placed it in Thomas's palm. This grants you limited access to the village under your grandfather's supervision. The silver acorn was cool to the touch. Unlike the constantly warm key, intricate patterns were etched into its surface, reminiscent of the symbols on the threshold door, but more fluid, more alive. Thank you, Thomas said, closing his fingers around the gift. They followed a winding path from the outpost toward the village. Thomas struggled not to stare at everything. The strange birds with twin tails that flitted between trees. The subtle shimmer in the air like heat waves, but carrying a hint of fragrance. The stones in the path that seemed to glow faintly beneath their feet. The village center opened before them, a circular plaza surrounded by buildings that defied conventional architecture. Structures seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built upon it, with living wood and stone intertwined in graceful arches. People stopped to watch them pass, some bowing respectfully to Henry, others regarding Thomas with undisguised curiosity. Though they appeared largely human, subtle differences became apparent. Eyes with pupils shaped like diamonds, fingers slightly longer than normal, skin with a faint luminous quality in the shadows. They know who you are, Henry said quietly. What you represent. What do I represent? Thomas asked, suddenly self-conscious. Continuity, Mira answered from his other side. The unbroken line of guardians that maintains the balance. She gestured toward a large structure ahead. The council awaits. Remember your protocols, young Thomas. First impressions matter greatly here. Thomas clutched the silver acorn tightly as they approached the council chamber. The enormity of his grandfather's legacy and his potential future finally becoming real. The council chamber was a circular room with walls of living wood, still growing, branches intertwining overhead to form a natural dome. 7 elders sat in a semicircle, their robes varying shades of green and blue, their faces weathered, but their eyes sharp. At the center stood a pedestal holding what appeared to be an ancient scroll. Thomas followed Henry's owl, bowing deeply before the assembly. Henry Caldwell, guardian of the western threshold, announced an elder with a silver circlet. And this must be your grandson, Thomas. Yes, Elder Valerian, Henry replied. The key has responded to him. His training has begun. Murmurs rippled through the council. Elder Valerian studied Thomas with unsettling intensity. You have your grandmother's eyes, he finally said. Lara was one of our most promising guardians before she chose your world. You knew my grandmother? Thomas asked, forgetting protocol in his surprise. A sad smile touched Valerian's lips. She was my daughter. The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. This man, this being from another world, was his great-grandfather. He looked to Henry, who nodded solemnly. "We thought it best you learn your heritage directly from the council," Henry explained. "Your connection to Eldamir runs deeper than most guardians." Elder Valerian gestured to the scroll. "This is the lineage of guardians, maintained since the first thresholds appeared thousands of years ago. Today we add your name as guardian in training." Another elder, a woman with intricate tattoos along her forearms, stepped forward. "But first, you must understand what this means. The responsibilities, the sacrifices." She unrolled the scroll, revealing not paper, but something like thin, flexible crystal. Names and symbols glowed from within, forming a complex web of connections. Thomas recognized some of the symbols from Henry's journal. "Your family has guarded the western threshold for 9 generations," she explained. "When Lyra crossed to your world, it created a unique situation, guardians with blood of both realms." Her finger traced a line of luminous script. "That has happened only twice before in our history. And both times," added a third elder, "it resulted in guardians of exceptional ability and exceptional burden." Thomas found his voice. "What kind of burden?" The council members exchanged glances. Elder Valerian answered, "Dual-natured guardians experience both worlds more deeply, feel the balance more acutely. The work takes a greater toll." "Is that why my father refused to become a guardian?" Thomas asked Henry directly. A heavy silence fell. Henry's shoulders sagged slightly. "Your father witnessed the price firsthand," he finally said. "Your grandmother's health failed early because of the strain. Being away from her native realm for so long, while maintaining the threshold, it consumed her." Thomas remembered the lack of photographs of his grandmother, how his father changed the subject whenever she was mentioned. "She died because of this. She chose her path," Elder Valerian said firmly, "as all guardians must. She chose love, family, and duty, knowing the cost." The female elder approached with a small ceramic bowl containing a clear liquid. "Touch the scroll while immersed in the waters of lineage. If you are truly called to be a guardian, your name will appear." Thomas hesitated, looking to Henry. "This doesn't commit you to anything," his grandfather assured him. "It merely confirms your potential. The final choice will always be yours." Heart pounding, Thomas dipped his fingers into the cool liquid and placed them on the crystal scroll. The sensation was electric, a tingling that shot up his arm and spread through his body. The crystal glowed brighter beneath his touch, and symbols began to form, etching themselves into the surface. "Thomas Caldwell," Elder Valerian read, "descendant of 2 realms." When Thomas withdrew his hand, the liquid on his fingers had turned a deep sapphire blue before absorbing into his skin. The color briefly traced his veins before fading. "The waters recognize you," the female elder said with evident surprise. "This is unprecedented for one so young." "What does it mean?" Thomas asked. "It means you have not merely the potential, but the gift," Valerian explained. "The threshold has already accepted you as its guardian, even without formal training." After the ceremony, they returned to Henry's cabin. Thomas was uncharacteristically quiet, processing all he had learned. In the underground room, Henry withdrew a cylindrical container from a locked chest. Inside was another crystal scroll, smaller than the one in the council chamber. "Your family tree," Henry explained, unrolling it carefully. "Both sides of your heritage." The crystal glowed faintly, illuminating names and connecting lines. On one side, familiar names from Earth, the Caldwell lineage back 9 generations. On the other, names written in Eldamir script, including Lyra and Valerian. "Dad never told me any of this," Thomas said, a hint of betrayal in his voice. "He let me believe Grandma died of an illness." "In a way, she did," Henry replied gently. "Being separated from her native realm was like a slow illness." Robert blamed himself. Thought if he'd taken up the guardianship, shared the burden, she might have lived longer. Thomas studied the scroll, tracing the line that connected his parents. "Does Mum know about any of this?" Henry shook his head. "Your father wanted a normal life, away from thresholds and guardians. I respected his choice, but when your parents' marriage began to falter, Robert thought you might find clarity here, even if he couldn't. So he sent me to you. To discover your heritage on your own terms," Henry corrected. Without his biases, Thomas stared at the names glowing in the crystal. "I have a whole family I never knew existed." 3 weeks had passed since Thomas's introduction to the council. Each day brought new lessons: the complex language of Eldermere, the proper maintenance of threshold seals, the history of interactions between worlds. Henry proved a patient teacher, his gruff exterior softening as he shared knowledge accumulated over decades. But Thomas grew restless. The supervised visits to the Guardian outpost felt increasingly restrictive. There was a whole world beyond those walls, a world half his blood came from, that remained largely unexplored. "I'll be at the western perimeter today," Henry announced over breakfast. Mirror reported unusual readings from the boundary stones. "I need to verify them myself." Thomas nodded, trying to mask his disappointment. "Another day of study alone in the cabin. You should continue translating the 3rd chapter of the Guardian Codex," Henry continued, gathering supplies into a worn backpack. "We'll discuss it when I return this evening." After his grandfather departed, Thomas dutifully worked on translations for an hour. But the Guardian's key hummed persistently from his pocket, as if urging action rather than study. The silver Archon token sat beside his notebook, catching morning light through the cabin window. "One quick trip," Thomas whispered to himself. "Just to the village and back. I know the protocols now." Decision made, he descended to the hidden room and approached the threshold door. The key slid into the lock as naturally as breathing. With practiced words and movements, Thomas opened the passage to Eldermere. The outpost was empty, Mirror presumably accompanying Henry to the perimeter, but Thomas knew the way to the village. He clutched the silver acorn in his palm as he followed the now familiar path, reciting proper greetings in his mind. The village was bustling with activity. Thomas moved through the central plaza with growing confidence, nodding politely to those who acknowledged him. Most recognized him as a guardian in training, and respectfully kept their distance. A few children stared openly, whispering among themselves about his earth clothes and unusual appearance. Near the far side of the plaza, Thomas noticed a narrow street he hadn't seen during previous visits. Unlike the main thoroughfares, this path was quiet, almost secretive, winding between ancient trees whose branches formed a canopy overhead. Something about it called to him a subtle pull, similar to the compass's indication of a threshold. Curious, Thomas followed the path. The village sounds faded behind him, replaced by a gentle rustle of leaves and distant wind chimes. The path narrowed further, eventually becoming little more than a trail through increasingly wild vegetation. He should turn back, Thomas knew, but the persistent feeling of being drawn forward kept him walking. The trail ended abruptly at a small clearing. In its center stood a solitary tree, unlike the others, its bark black as coal, its leaves a deep crimson. Sitting beneath it was a girl approximately Thomas's age, sketching in a notebook. She looked up as he approached, seemingly unsurprised by his presence. Her features were clearly Eldermerian eyes, with diamond-shaped pupils, skin with a subtle luminescence, but there was something familiar about her face that Thomas couldn't place. "I wondered when you'd find this place," she said, closing her notebook. "Grandfather Valerian said you would, sooner or later." Thomas stopped short. "You know Elder Valerian?" "He's my grandfather too," she replied with a hint of a smile. "Which makes us cousins, I suppose." "I'm Ilara. Thomas." He hesitated, processing this new connection. "Why haven't I met you before? At the council chambers or the outpost?" A shadow crossed her face. "I'm not exactly welcome in official spaces right now. Not since I started asking too many questions about the fading." "The fading," Thomas repeated. Alara studied him carefully. They haven't told you. It wasn't a question. Of course they haven't. The Guardians prefer to pretend everything is under control until it's too late. She stood brushing leaves from her clothes, similar to those worn by other Eldermirians, but darker, less ornate. This tree is the first sign. It shouldn't be black. None of our trees should be. Thomas approached the strange tree cautiously. Up close, its bark seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. What's happening to it? The balance is shifting, Alara said quietly. The boundaries between worlds are weakening, and something is seeping through, something that doesn't belong in either world. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small stone with red markings that seemed to pulse faintly. Here, a warning stone. It grows warm when the fading is near. Thomas accepted the stone hesitantly. Why are you giving me this? Because the Guardians won't admit the danger until it's too late. They're too bound by tradition, by rules. Her diamond eyes fixed on his, but you're different. Part of both worlds bound by neither's limitations. A sudden sound, branches breaking, footsteps approaching made them both turn. Someone's coming, Alara whispered urgently. You should go. If they find you here, with me. When can I see you again? Thomas asked, pocketing the warning stone. Find me, don't find me. That's up to you. A hint of challenge entered her voice. Just remember, cousin, not everything the Guardians tell you is the complete truth. She slipped away through the underbrush with surprising speed. Moments later, Elder Mira emerged into the clearing, her expression shifting from concern to stern disapproval when she spotted Thomas. This area is restricted, she said sharply. How did you find this place? Where is your grandfather? The warning stone grew warm against Thomas's leg as he fumbled for an explanation, knowing he had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple rule violation. Of all the irresponsible, Henry paced the length of the cabin, his face flushed with anger. You could have been lost, trapped, or worse. The boundaries are unstable enough without an untrained guardian wandering restricted areas alone. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, the warning stone a secret weight in his pocket. Elder Mira had escorted him back to the outpost and through the threshold, where an equally furious Henry waited. I'm sorry, Thomas said, for what felt like the 20th time. I was just exploring. Exploring, Henry stopped pacing. That area is restricted for good reason. The council has been monitoring that section of forest for months. Because of the fading, Thomas asked before he could stop himself. Henry went completely still. Where did you hear that term? Thomas hesitated, reluctant to reveal his meeting with Alara. Overheard some villagers talking. His grandfather's eyes narrowed, clearly not believing the explanation but letting it pass. With a heavy sigh, Henry lowered himself into the chair opposite Thomas. Yes, the fading, he admitted, though we've been calling it boundary degradation in official reports. What exactly is it? Henry rubbed his temples. Something we don't fully understand yet. Areas where the natural properties of Eldermere are changing, plants withering or transforming, water losing its clarity. Even the air feels different, heavier. Is it happening here too, in our world? Beginning to, Henry's voice grew somber. That's where I was today. The western perimeter shows signs of similar degradation, subtle changes in plant life, unusual animal behavior. Nothing most people would notice, but to a guardian, he trailed off, looking suddenly older and more tired than Thomas had ever seen him. Is there anything we can do? Thomas asked. The council has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. All guardians from all thresholds will attend. Henry fixed Thomas with a stern gaze. And you will stay here, in this world, until we better understand what we're facing. Thomas wanted to protest, but knew it would be futile. Instead, he helped prepare dinner in silence, his mind whirling with questions about Alara, the black tree, and the threat his grandfather seemed so concerned about. That night, unable to sleep, Thomas slipped out onto the cabin's porch. The mountain air was crisp, stars brilliant overhead. He pulled the warning stone from his pocket. It remained cool, showing no sign of immediate danger. A sound from the tree line made him tense, but it was only a deer, picking its way carefully through the underbrush. As Thomas watched, the animal froze, ears twitching nervously before suddenly bolting away, as if frightened. Thomas scanned the forest edge. Nothing seemed amiss, yet the warning stone in his palm began to warm slightly. Carefully he stepped off the porch and approached the spot where the deer had stood. In the moonlight, he could just make out a patch of disturbed earth. Something dark gleamed against the soil, a leaf, but unlike any Thomas had seen in these woods. Its edges were crisp, its surface glossy, but instead of healthy green, it was entirely black, as if charred. The warning stone grew warmer as Thomas crouched for a closer look. When he cautiously picked up the leaf, its texture felt wrong, not like plant matter at all, but something almost metallic, unnaturally cold, despite the summer night. "The fading," Thomas whispered, recalling the black tree in Eldamere. He quickly pocketed the leaf and returned to the cabin, unaware of the dark residue now staining his fingertips. Morning brought new concerns. Henry moved stiffly, wincing as he reached for the coffee pot. "Grandpa, are you okay?" Thomas asked. "Just old bones complaining," Henry dismissed. But Thomas noticed the unusual pallor of his skin, the slight tremble in his hands. By noon, his grandfather's condition had deteriorated enough that he could no longer hide it. He sat heavily in his armchair, breathing labored. "Perhaps we should postpone the council meeting," Thomas suggested, genuinely worried now. Henry shook his head stubbornly. "Can't. Too important." He gestured weakly to his journal on the side table. "Thomas, I need you to go in my place." "What?" "But I'm not ready. I barely understand what's happening." "You're more ready than you know." Henry's eyes, though tired, remained sharp. "The key chose you for a reason. The council will listen. You bear Valerian's bloodline." As they argued, a soft knock came at the door. Thomas opened it to find Elder Mira, concern evident on her face. "Henry missed the preliminary meeting," she said, then stopped short, seeing his condition. "By the ancients, you look terrible." "I felt better," Henry admitted. Mira placed a hand on his forehead, then drew back sharply. "This is no natural illness." She turned to Thomas. "When did this start?" "Just this morning," Thomas said, then hesitated. "But last night I found something strange in the woods." He produced the blackened leaf from his pocket. Mira's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Where exactly did you find this?" As Thomas described the location, Mira's face grew increasingly grave. She carefully took the leaf, wrapping it in a handkerchief without touching it directly. "The council must see this immediately," she said. "The fading has reached your world faster than we feared." She glanced at Henry. "And I believe it may be affecting you directly, old friend. Your connection to the threshold makes you vulnerable." "What can we do?" Thomas asked, fear tightening his chest. "Come with me to Eldamere now," Mira said firmly. "Both of you. The council has resources that may help Henry, and they need to know about this contamination." The warning stone burned hot against Thomas's leg, as if confirming the urgency of their situation. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their urgent preparations. Thomas peered through the window to see a blue pickup truck parking beside the cabin. His heart nearly stopped when the driver emerged. "Dad?" he whispered, in disbelief. Robert Caldwell stood uncertainly by his truck, looking much as Thomas remembered, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair now flecked with grey, his face weathered from years working construction. He hadn't visited the cabin since Thomas was a toddler. "Your father?" Mira asked sharply. "Here? Now?" Thomas nodded, equally confused. Henry struggled to his feet, waving off Thomas's attempt to help. "Let him in," Henry said grimly. "This can't be coincidence." Robert's expression shifted from determination to shock when Thomas opened the door. "Thomas, you've grown," he trailed off, looking past his son to Henry's weakened state and the unfamiliar woman in strange clothing. "Something's happening, isn't it? I felt it. Felt what? Thomas asked. A pulling, like something tugging at my inside. Robert unconsciously rubbed his chest. Started 3 days ago, got worse until I couldn't ignore it. His eyes fixed on Henry. Dad, you look terrible. The threshold is calling its guardians, Mira explained. All of them, even those who rejected the responsibility. Robert's jaw tightened. I didn't come back for that. I came for Thomas, to take him home. It's too late for that, Henry said wearily. He's already part of this. The key has chosen him. No, Robert's voice hardened. I didn't spend 20 years keeping him away from this life just to lose him to it now. Get your things, Thomas. We're leaving. Before Thomas could respond, the warning stone in his pocket grew suddenly hot, painfully so. He yelped, pulling it out. The stone's red markings glowed brightly in the cabin's dim light. Simultaneously, the trees beyond the window began to sway. Though Thomas felt no wind, a shadow passed across the sun, plunging the room into momentary darkness. It's here, Mira whispered, her diamond pupils contracting to thin slits. The cabin door burst open again. Elara stumbled in, breathless, her clothes disheveled. Thomas, the forest. She stopped short, taking in the assembled group. Oh, you already know. Know what? Robert demanded. Who are you? Valerian's granddaughter, Mira said, eyeing Elara suspiciously. Who should be in protective custody given the circumstances? Elara ignored the elder guardian. The fading is accelerating. The Black Forest has reached the village perimeter. The council is evacuating everyone to the inner sanctum. Henry swayed dangerously, and Robert instinctively moved to support him, years of estrangement momentarily forgotten. We need to get him to Eldamir, Mira insisted. Their healers might slow the progression. What exactly is happening to him? Thomas asked, fear making his voice crack. The fading corrupts guardians first, Elara explained. Their connection to the threshold makes them vulnerable. It's how it spreads between worlds. Robert's face paled. And you knew this, he demanded of Henry. You knew the risks, and still tried to drag Thomas into it. I knew only that balance must be maintained, Henry replied weakly. That duty passes from generation to generation, a duty that killed Mom, Robert's voice broke. I watched her fade away day by day until there was nothing left. And now it's happening to you, and you want the same for my son. The pain in his father's voice made Thomas's chest ache, but before anyone could respond, a tremendous crack echoed through the forest like a massive tree splitting. The cabin trembled. Outside, birds erupted from the treetops in panicked flight. The threshold is destabilizing, Mira said urgently. We must cross now, before it's compromised. I'm not letting Thomas go back there, Robert insisted. Dad, Thomas stepped forward. I have to. Grandpa needs help, and I'm already involved. I've been training for a few weeks. That's not enough to. It will have to be. Elara interrupted. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a smooth river stone with swirling patterns that caught the light oddly. Here, a communication stone. They're paired. I have its twin. If we get separated, we can still contact each other. Thomas accepted the stone, feeling a faint vibration as it recognized its holder. This is madness, Robert protested. We should be getting as far away from here as possible. And go where? Elara challenged. The fading will spread. First this mountain, then the valley, then beyond. There is no away from this. Thomas could see his father wrestling with fear, anger, and a growing realization that retreat wasn't an option. Finally, Robert's shoulders slumped. If we're doing this, we do it my way, he said firmly. I spent 5 years as a guardian before I left. I know things, techniques that might help. Surprise registered on Mira's face. You completed training, Henry never said. He doesn't know everything I learned, Robert replied cryptically. There were guardians who taught me alternative methods, ones the council doesn't approve of. Another ominous crack from the forest punctuated his words. Henry's breathing grew more labored. We're out of time for debate, Mira said. The threshold chamber. Now. Thomas slipped the communication stone into his pocket alongside the warning stone, which still pulsed with heat. An unlikely alliance had formed in the face of crisis. His ailing grandfather, his estranged father, a council elder, and his rebellious cousin. Stay close to me, Robert told Thomas as they descended to the hidden room. Whatever happens next, we face it together. The threshold crossing was rougher than any Thomas had experienced before. The door resisted, requiring both his key and Mira's combined efforts to unlock. The passage itself felt turbulent, like wading through churning water rather than simply stepping between worlds. Henry was immediately taken to the healers upon their arrival in Eldermere. The rest of their party was escorted to quarters within the inner sanctum, a fortress-like structure at the heart of the village, its walls made of a pearlescent stone that seemed to glow from within. The council will convene in 3 hours, Mira informed them. Until then, rest and prepare yourselves. Her gaze lingered on Elara. All of you are to remain here. The outer districts are no longer safe. As soon as Mira departed, Robert turned to Thomas. Show me what you've learned so far. Dad, shouldn't we? 3 hours isn't long, Robert cut him off. If you're going before the council, you need every advantage. Show me your training. Over the next hour, Thomas demonstrated the techniques Henry had taught him. Threshold sensing, basic sigils, energy manipulation. Robert observed silently, his expression unreadable. Solid fundamentals, he finally said. But too rigid, too by the book. He turned to Elara. And you? What has Valerian taught you? Different approaches, she replied cautiously. Elder Valerian believes in adaptive techniques rather than strict protocols. Robert nodded, as if confirming something. That's why they keep you separated from official Guardian business. You're too unpredictable for them. The council prefers control over innovation. Elara agreed. Both of you sit. Robert gestured to the floor. When they were seated cross-legged, he continued. The Guardian methods you've been taught are deliberately limited. Centuries ago, Guardians wielded far greater influence over the thresholds. They could not just maintain them, but actively shape them. Why would they restrict that knowledge? Thomas asked. After the Sundering, a catastrophic threshold collapse about 300 years ago, the Council decided certain abilities were too dangerous, too much potential for misuse. Robert paced as he spoke. But some Guardians preserved the old ways, passing them down secretly, and you learned these techniques? Elara asked, clearly intrigued. Some, not all. Robert knelt between them. Thomas, give me your hand. Hesitantly, Thomas extended his hand. Robert took it, placing his other hand over Thomas's Guardian key. Close your eyes, feel the key's energy, but don't direct it. Let it flow naturally. Thomas obeyed. The key's familiar humming intensified, spreading up his arm and throughout his body. Now, imagine the key not as a tool, but as an extension of yourself. Not something you use, but something you are. The sensation shifted subtly. The boundary between Thomas and the key began to blur. The humming synchronized perfectly with his heartbeat, his breathing. Good, Robert murmured. Now, reach out with that feeling, not just to the nearest threshold, but to all of them. Feel the connections, Thomas concentrated. At first, nothing happened. Then, gradually, he sensed threads of energy radiating outward, delicate filaments connecting to points throughout both worlds. Some felt strong and stable, others wavering and weak. I can feel them, he whispered, in awe. So many. Those are the threshold network, Robert explained. What the Council doesn't emphasize is that they're all connected. Damage to one affects all others. Thomas opened his eyes, disoriented by the new awareness that continued even with his vision restored. There's a dark spot, he said, northwest of here, like a hole in the network. The fading, Elara confirmed. It's consuming the energy that maintains the thresholds. Robert reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew an object wrapped in cloth. Carefully, he unwrapped it to reveal a pendant, a clear crystal suspended in an intricate metal framework. "This belonged to your grandmother," he told Thomas. "A guardian's pendant. It enhances your natural abilities, focuses them. The council restricts their use now, claims they're too taxing on the wearer." He placed the pendant around Thomas's neck. Immediately, the crystal warmed against Thomas's skin, and his perception of the threshold network sharpened dramatically. "It responds to you," Robert noted with satisfaction. "Your dual heritage makes you naturally stronger, more attuned to both worlds. The pendant amplifies that connection." "Is this why Grandma—" Thomas couldn't finish the question. "Partly," Robert acknowledged, "but she never learned to regulate the flow. The pendant draws energy from the wearer to stabilize thresholds. Without proper training, it can drain you completely." "And you'll teach me how to regulate it?" Thomas asked. "What I can in the time we have." Robert's expression grew serious. "The fading is accelerating. We may not have the luxury of gradual training." Over the next 2 hours, Robert guided Thomas through exercises to control the pendant's draw on his energy. Alara joined the training, demonstrating techniques her grandfather had taught her, methods that complemented Robert's unorthodox approach. "The key and pendant together give you access to threshold energy," Robert explained. "Most guardians can only maintain but you might be able to do more, to actively counter the fading." "How?" Thomas asked, feeling the weight of expectation growing heavier. "By reweaving the damaged portions of the network." Robert's voice lowered. "It's dangerous, potentially fatal if you overextend, but it might be our only chance to stop the spread." A knock at the door interrupted them. An Eldermere attendant stood outside, his expression grave. "The council awaits," he announced. "And there has been a development with Guardian Henry. Your presence is requested immediately." As they hurried through the corridors of the inner sanctum, Thomas felt the pendant pulse against his chest, as if sensing the coming confrontation. His newly expanded awareness of the threshold network revealed more dark spots forming, small tears in the fabric that bound the worlds together. "Whatever happens in there," Robert said quietly, "trust your instincts. The pendant will guide you if you let it." The council chamber was in disarray. The semicircular arrangement of seats had been abandoned, with elders clustered in tense conversation. Elder Valerian spotted them first, breaking away to intercept their group. "Thomas, Robert," he acknowledged them with a nod before turning to Alara. "And my wayward granddaughter. I might have known you'd find your way here despite the restrictions." "What's happened to Grandpa?" Thomas asked, anxiety tightening his throat. Valerian's expression softened. "Come, it's better you see for yourselves." He led them through a side door into a smaller chamber. Henry lay on a bed of sorts, tended by 2 healers whose hands glowed with soft blue light. Thomas rushed forward, then stopped short in horror. Dark veins had spread across Henry's exposed skin, pulsing with an unnatural blackness. His breathing was labored, eyes closed, face contorted in pain. "The fading's corruption," Valerian explained gravely. "It's progressing rapidly." "Can't you help him?" Thomas demanded. "We're trying. The healers have slowed its advance, but—" he shook his head. "We've never seen it progress this quickly." Robert approached the bed, his face ashen. Despite years of estrangement, seeing his father in such a state clearly shook him. "This is more aggressive than natural fading," Ilaro observed, studying the pattern of dark veins. "It's almost as if it were directed," Valerian finished. "Yes, that is the council's growing suspicion as well." "Directed by what?" Thomas asked. "Not what," came a new voice. "Who?" Mira entered, accompanied by another elder carrying a sealed container made of dark glass. "We believe the fading has been weaponized, deliberately spread to weaken the threshold network." "By whom?" Robert demanded. "Who would have both the knowledge and motivation?" The elders exchanged glances. "That's why we needed you here," Valerian said finally. "There is only one guardian with both the ability and the grudge. He looked pointedly at Robert. Your former mentor, Thaddeus Vaughn. Robert paled. Impossible. Thaddeus was banished beyond the far threshold. No one could return from there. Yet evidence suggests he has, Mira said, gesturing to the container. This was recovered from the heart of the corrupted forest. The elder carefully unsealed it, revealing a viscous black substance that seemed to move of its own accord, pressing against the glass as if seeking escape. Concentrated fading, Valerian explained. In its pure form, no natural process could create this. It requires intimate knowledge of threshold energy, knowledge only a senior guardian would possess. Thomas felt the pendant grow warm against his chest, responding to the corrupted energy even through the sealed container. Thaddeus taught me alternative techniques, Robert admitted, but nothing like this. He was unorthodox, yes, even rebellious, but he believed in maintaining balance, not destroying it. People change in exile, Mira said coldly. 20 years in the void between thresholds would alter anyone. What does he want? Thomas asked. If it is indeed Thaddeus, Valerian answered, then likely what he always wanted, to merge the thresholds permanently. Create a single reality where guardians rule both worlds. That would destabilize everything. Alara protested. The worlds would tear each other apart. Thaddeus believed he could control the process, Robert said quietly. That's why he was banished. He attempted a forced merger at the eastern threshold. A groan from the bed drew their attention. Henry's eyes had opened, though they were clouded with pain. Thomas, he whispered hoarsely. Thomas rushed to his side, taking his grandfather's hand despite the dark veins pulsing beneath the skin. I'm here, Grandpa. The cabin, basement, hidden panel behind the bookshelf. Each word seemed to cost Henry tremendous effort. Instructions, how to purify. His voice faded as the healers urged Thomas back. He needs rest, one insisted. The corruption spreads faster when he's agitated. We need to retrieve whatever Henry was referring to, Valerian decided. If he created a purification method, I'll go, Robert volunteered immediately. I know that cabin better than anyone. Not alone, Mira objected. The threshold is unstable, and the forest on both sides is becoming dangerous. I'll go with him, Thomas said firmly. So will I, Alara added, ignoring her grandfather's frown of disapproval. Out of the question, Valerian began, but Robert interrupted. They both have abilities that could prove useful. Thomas knows what we're looking for, and Alara knows the forest paths better than anyone. Before the elders could argue further, a guardian burst into the room. Attack at the northern perimeter. Something's coming through the threshold. Chaos erupted. Valerian barked orders, directing guardians to defensive positions. Mira hurried to secure the container of corrupted energy. In the confusion, Robert gripped Thomas's arm. Now's our chance, while they're distracted. But shouldn't we help defend? Finding Henry's purification method will help more than joining a battle we're not prepared for, Robert insisted. Reluctantly, Thomas nodded. He approached Henry one last time, squeezing his grandfather's hand gently. We'll be back with help, I promise. The trio slipped away unnoticed amid the commotion, making their way to the outpost where the threshold door connected to the cabin. As they prepared to cross, Alara secured a small flask to her belt. What's that? Thomas asked. I took a sample, she explained, indicating a tiny amount of the black substance now contained in a heavily warded flask. If your grandfather found a way to purify it, we'll need something to test it on. Robert looked concerned but nodded grimly. Let's move quickly. If Thaddeus is truly behind this, we don't have much time. As Thomas activated the threshold door, the pendant around his neck pulsed with increasing urgency. The network of connections he could now perceive was fraying rapidly, dark spots spreading like ink through water. The door swung open, revealing not the familiar hidden room, but a swirling mass of shadows. Something was terribly wrong with the threshold. The crossing felt wrong, like swimming through molasses that clung to every inch of their bodies. Thomas emerged gasping in the hidden room beneath the cabin, the Guardian's pendant burning hot against his skin. "Something's interfering with the threshold," Robert said grimly, helping Alara through. "We need to hurry." The cabin above was eerily silent. Outside, no birds called, no insects chirped. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. The bookshelf, Thomas remembered, moving to the far wall where Henry kept his collection of worn paperbacks and leather-bound journals. Grandpa said, "There's a hidden panel." They searched frantically, pulling books from shelves, feeling for loose panels. Finally, Alara discovered a slight depression behind a row of nature guides. When pressed, it revealed a narrow compartment containing a single object, a stone tablet, no larger than Thomas's palm, cracked diagonally across its center. A threshold stone, Robert identified it, carefully lifting the broken pieces, part of the original boundary marker. But it's damaged. Thomas took the fragments, feeling a faint resonance with his pendant. Grandpa said this would help us purify the fading. Not the stone itself, Robert mused, but perhaps what's inscribed on it. Alara leaned closer, studying the faint markings. "These aren't standard Guardian sigils, they're older." A crash from upstairs interrupted them, the sound of breaking glass followed by heavy footsteps. "Someone's in the cabin," Robert whispered, drawing them away from the stairs. "Stay quiet." The footsteps moved deliberately across the floor above, pausing occasionally as if searching. Thomas clutched the broken stone pieces, his heart hammering. "There's another way out," he whispered. "A maintenance tunnel that leads to the generator shed. Grandpa showed me last week." Robert nodded. "Lead the way." They crept to a narrow door partially hidden behind storage shelves. The tunnel beyond was tight, barely tall enough to stand in, lined with electrical conduits and water pipes. Moving as quietly as possible, they followed its path away from the cabin. The generator shed stood 50 yards from the main building. Thomas eased the exit door open, peering out cautiously. No sign of intruders. "We should get to town," Robert decided. "My truck is still here, but it might be watched. There's a shortcut through the forest." Alara suggested. "It would keep us hidden." "The forest isn't safe," Thomas objected. "The fading, it's our best option," Robert cut in. "We just need to stay alert." They moved swiftly between the trees, following Alara's lead. Thomas kept the broken stone pieces secure in his pocket, occasionally feeling them pulse in sync with his pendant. Halfway down the mountain, disaster struck. A fallen log hidden beneath ferns caught Robert's foot, sending him tumbling down a steep embankment. Thomas and Alara scrambled after him, finding him at the bottom, face contorted in pain. "My leg," he gasped. "I think it's broken." Examination confirmed his assessment. A clean break of the tibia, the bone thankfully not protruding through the skin, but still serious. "We need to make a splint," Thomas said, looking around for suitable materials. As they worked to stabilize Robert's leg, Thomas noticed Alara staring intently at something through the trees. Following her gaze, he saw it, a patch of vegetation that looked wrong. The plants seemed normal at first glance, but on closer inspection, their colors were slightly off, their structures subtly altered. "The fading," Alara confirmed. "It's spreading faster than we thought." "How far to town?" Robert asked through gritted teeth. "Another 3 miles, Thomas estimated. "But you can't walk that." "Then you two go without me. Get the stone to someone who can decipher it." "We're not leaving you," Thomas insisted. "This is bigger than me," Robert argued. "Your grandfather is dying. Both worlds are at risk. The stone is our only lead." "He's right," Alara said quietly. "We need to keep moving." Thomas struggled internally, looking between his injured father and the broken stone pieces that might save his grandfather. "I can't do this," he finally admitted, his voice cracking. "I'm not ready. I've barely started training. How am I supposed to save everyone?" Robert reached up to grip Thomas's hand. "No Guardian starts ready. We learn by doing, by making hard choices." "What if I make the wrong choice?" What if I can't figure out what this stone means? What if Grandpa dies while we're stumbling around out here? The pendant seemed to grow heavier around his neck, its burden more apparent than ever. Thomas slumped down beside his father, the weight of responsibility crushing him. "When I was your age," Robert said softly, "I ran away. I couldn't handle the pressure, the expectations. I told myself I was protecting our family by staying away from guardian business." He gestured to his broken leg. "Look where that got us." Ilara knelt beside them. "My grandfather always says that doubt isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Only fools never question their path." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the communication stone, which glowed faintly in the dimming light. "We're not alone in this. We have resources, allies." Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the broken stone fragments in his pocket. They seemed to respond to his touch, warming slightly. The threshold stone isn't just broken, he realized suddenly. It was deliberately split. "Look at how clean the break is." He withdrew the pieces, fitting them together. The crack aligned perfectly, revealing a complete set of symbols that had been divided between the fragments. "A safeguard," Robert breathed, "to ensure the knowledge couldn't be used unless both pieces were brought together. Meaning what's inscribed here is powerful," Ilara added. "Maybe powerful enough to counter the fading." Thomas studied the now complete inscription, trying to decipher its meaning. The symbols seemed to shift under his gaze, rearranging themselves subtly as if responding to his attention. "I can almost understand it," he murmured. "It's like it's trying to communicate directly." A rustling in the underbrush nearby broke his concentration. They froze, listening intently as the sound grew closer. "Someone's coming," Ilara whispered. "We need to move." "Go," Robert urged. "I'll create a diversion. Meet me at Miller's Creek if you can." Thomas hesitated, torn between protecting his father and continuing their mission. "Trust me," Robert insisted. "This is my chance to finally do something right." The decision tore at Thomas, but there was no time for debate. He squeezed his father's shoulder, a wordless promise to return, then followed Ilara deeper into the forest. Behind them, Robert began making as much noise as possible, shouting and thrashing through the underbrush in the opposite direction. "This way," Ilara whispered, pulling Thomas down a nearly invisible game trail. They moved swiftly, ducking beneath low-hanging branches, using the growing dusk as cover. "Where are we going?" Thomas asked, when they finally paused to catch their breath. "Not to town," Ilara decided. "If Thaddeus has agents watching the cabin, they'll expect that. We need to get back to Eldermere through a different threshold. There's another one nearby, about a mile north. It's small, unstable, not official. My grandfather showed me years ago. Guardians like Thaddeus wouldn't know about it." Thomas pulled out the broken threshold stone, fitting the pieces together again. "Even if we make it back, we still need to figure out what this means." Ilara studied the ancient symbols. "I know where we can find answers. The archives. The council's archives? They'll catch us immediately, not those archives." Ilara smiled mysteriously. "The older ones, beneath the village." They continued north, moving more carefully now. Twice they spotted unnatural discolorations spreading through the vegetation, signs of the fading creeping across their world. Each time, the warning stone in Thomas's pocket grew warm, alerting them before they stumbled into contaminated areas. The small threshold Ilara led them to was hardly more than a shimmer in the air between two ancient oaks. No door, no formal structure, just a thin place between worlds. "How do we activate it?" Thomas asked. "Your key and pendant together. Focus on creating an opening." Thomas held the Guardian's key in one hand, the other pressed against his pendant. He concentrated, visualizing a doorway forming in the shimmer. The key hummed, the pendant warmed, and gradually the air between the trees seemed to fold inward, creating a passage barely wide enough for one person. Quickly, Ilara urged. "It won't hold long." The crossing was rougher than the established threshold, a dizzying sensation of being pulled apart and reassembled. They emerged in a dense grove of silver-barked trees. the indigo sky of Eldemir visible through the canopy. "Where are we?" Thomas asked, disoriented. "The old forest, about 2 miles from the village," Alara replied. "We need to approach carefully. The council will have guardians watching all official entrances." They made their way toward the village, skirting its perimeter, until they reached a small stream that disappeared beneath a stone embankment. "The drainage system," Alara explained. "It leads under the village center. From there we can access the archive." The tunnel was cramped and damp, forcing them to crawl in places. It eventually opened into a larger maintenance passage, lit by phosphorescent fungi growing along the walls. "Not much further," Alara assured him, leading the way through the maze-like passages. Few remember these tunnels exist. They predate the current village. They emerged into a vast underground chamber that took Thomas's breath away. Unlike the warm wooden architecture of the village above, this space was constructed of massive stone blocks, fitted together with incredible precision. Ceiling arches soared overhead, supporting the weight of the village above. "The original settlement," Alara said softly, "built when the first thresholds appeared thousands of years ago." Rows of crystal cases lined the walls, each containing artifacts and documents far older than anything Thomas had seen in the council chambers. At the center stood a raised platform holding an enormous, circular table inscribed with a map, unlike any Thomas had ever seen. "The threshold map," Alara explained with reverence. "It shows every known connection between our worlds, permanent, temporary, and potential." Thomas approached the map, mesmerized by its complexity. Lines of light pulsed between points, some steady and bright, others flickering weakly. Dark patches marked areas affected by the fading. "This is how the first guardians monitored the boundaries," Alara continued, "before the council restricted access, claiming it was too dangerous for ordinary guardians to have such complete knowledge." Thomas placed the broken threshold stone pieces on the map's edge. "So if anyone would know what these symbols mean, the archives would." Alara gestured to the crystal cases. "We just need to find the right reference." They began searching semiotically, examining ancient texts and artifacts. Hours passed as they pieced together fragments of forgotten knowledge. The threshold stone symbols appeared in various contexts: purification rituals, healing ceremonies, barrier reinforcements. "It's not just one technique," Thomas realized as connections formed in his mind. "It's several combined. The stone describes a method to not just stop the fading, but to reverse it." Alara looked up from an ancient scroll, "But the price is high." "According to this, the purification requires a tremendous amount of energy from the guardian performing it." "How much energy?" Thomas asked, though he suspected the answer. "Potentially fatal amounts," she confirmed grimly. "The guardian channels pure threshold energy through themselves, using their own life force as a filter to cleanse the corruption." The weight of this knowledge settled heavily on Thomas. That's why Grandpa broke the stone. He knew the risk was too great to leave the knowledge intact for someone to use recklessly. Or he separated it to ensure that only someone with both pieces could make the choice, Alara suggested. A new text caught Thomas's attention. A journal written by a guardian from centuries ago who had faced a similar, if smaller, corruption event. "Listen to this," he said, translating the ancient script. "The corruption feeds on division, the natural separation between worlds. By temporarily strengthening the connection rather than the boundary, we force the corruption to overextend, making it vulnerable to purification. That's the opposite of what the council would do," Alara noted. "They'd try to reinforce the boundaries, which might actually make the fading stronger." Thomas's pendant pulsed in apparent agreement, warming against his chest. The broken threshold stone pieces began to glow faintly where they sat on the map's edge. "We need to get this information to the council," Thomas decided. "They'll never accept it," Alara argued. "It contradicts everything they believe about threshold maintenance." "Then we'll have to show them it works." Thomas studied the map intently. "Look, there's a small contamination point here, away from the main spread. If we could purify that as a demonstration." A sudden tremor shook the chamber. Dust, and small stones raining from the ceiling. The lights on the map flickered, then stabilized. "The boundaries are deteriorating faster," Elara said urgently. "We're running out of time." Thomas gathered the threshold stone pieces and the most relevant texts. "We need one more thing before we confront the council. Proof that this method works. And how do we get that?" Thomas pointed to a pulsing spot on the map. "We test it ourselves, on a small scale." Emerging from the ancient archives required caution. The village above was in a state of heightened alert. Guardians patrolled in pairs, civilians hurried to secure buildings, and the air itself seemed charged with tension. "We need a safe place to attempt the purification," Thomas whispered, as they crept through back alleys, avoiding detection. "I know somewhere," Elara replied. "My mother's workshop. It's isolated, and she has equipment we might need." Elara's mother, it turned out, was a threshold artisan, one who crafted tools and artifacts for Guardian. Her workshop stood apart from other buildings, partially built into the side of a hill at the village edge. "She's likely at the council chambers now," Elara explained, unlocking the door with a complex gesture rather than a key. All artisans would be called in during a crisis. The workshop interior was a fascinating blend of studio, laboratory, and forge. Workbenches held partially completed artifacts. Shelves displayed minerals and crystals in various stages of process. At the center, a specially reinforced platform surrounded by containment sigils served as a testing area. "Perfect," Thomas said, examining the platform. "We can attempt the purification here with minimal risk of spread if something goes wrong." Elara opened a cabinet and withdrew a clear crystal the size of a plum. "A purifying crystal. Mother creates these for cleansing contaminated artifacts. It might amplify our efforts." Thomas placed the broken threshold stone pieces on a workbench, arranging them to form the complete inscription. "According to what we found, we need to create a controlled connection to the fading, then channel purified threshold energy through it." "The shadow flask," Elara remembered, removing the small container of corrupted energy from her belt. "We can use this as our target." They worked methodically, preparing the workshop. Thomas studied the threshold stone inscription, committing the purification sigils to memory. Elara gathered materials, chalk for drawing containment circles, crystalline dust for amplification, water from Eldermare's sacred spring for stabilization. "Ready?" Elara asked finally, the workshop now transformed into a ritual space. Thomas nodded, though his heart hammered with apprehension. They placed the shadow flask at the center of the platform, surrounded by concentric circles of protective sigils. The purifying crystal rested just outside the innermost circle, positioned to focus energy toward the flask. "According to the texts, I need to establish a connection with the corruption first," Thomas said. "Then redirect purified energy through my pendant." "That's dangerous," Elara warned. "The corruption could flow back through the connection." "That's why you'll monitor the flow," Thomas explained. "If anything goes wrong, anything at all, break the connection immediately." Thomas knelt before the platform, placing his hands on the outermost circle. He closed his eyes, focusing on the Guardian's pendant against his chest. Its familiar warmth intensified as he channeled his awareness through it. Carefully, he extended his senses toward the shadow flask. The moment he made contact, he recoiled instinctively. The corruption felt alive, malevolent, hungry, so different from the clean, structured energy of the thresholds. "Steady," Elara murmured, her hands hovering near the purifying crystal. "Don't let it overwhelm you." Thomas tried again, more cautious. This time, he maintained the connection, allowing himself to feel the nature of the corruption without absorbing it. The pendant grew hotter, almost painfully so, as it filtered the sensations. "It's not just disordered energy," he gasped. "It's inverted somehow. Threshold energy turned inside out." "That makes sense," Elara replied. "If Thaddeus wanted to merge the worlds, he'd need to reverse the natural repulsion between them." With this understanding, Thomas began the purification process. He visualized the pendant drawing pure energy from the threshold network, concentrating it, then directing it through his connection to the corruption. The purifying crystal began to glow, amplifying his efforts. The battle was immediate, and the corruption resisted, pushing back against the cleansing flow. Thomas felt it trying to spread through their connection, seeking to corrupt him as it had his grandfather. The pendant burned against his skin as it filtered the darkness. "It's working," Elara reported. "The flask. The substance is changing." Through gritted teeth, Thomas maintained the flow. His strength began to wane, the effort of channeling such powerful energies taking its toll. Just when he thought he couldn't continue, a new sensation emerged. The broken threshold stone pieces on the workbench began to resonate with his efforts, adding their ancient power to his. With a final surge of energy, Thomas completed the purification. The shadow flask now contained not black corruption, but clear, silvery liquid, purified threshold essence. He collapsed backward, exhausted. Elara rushed to his side. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "You actually reversed the corruption." "But the strain," Thomas gasped, his limbs trembling from exertion. "To do this on a larger scale would require more power than any single guardian could channel," finished a familiar voice from the doorway. They turned to find Elder Valerian watching them, his expression unreadable. "Grandfather," Elara began, moving protectively in front of Thomas. "We can explain." "No need," Valerian interrupted, approaching to examine their work. "I've been watching since you entered the archives." "You knew?" Thomas asked weakly. "Of course. Did you think the oldest guardian on the council wouldn't notice activity in the ancient chambers?" A hint of pride crept into his voice. "Though I admit I'm impressed by what you've accomplished." He lifted the purified flask, studying it intently. "You've done what the council believed impossible. Reversed the corruption without destroying the essence. Then you'll help us convince the council?" Elara asked hopefully. "The council is in disarray," Valerian admitted. "The northern threshold has been breached. Guardian Henry's condition worsens. And now word has come that Thaddeus himself has been sighted near the central threshold." "We need to act quickly," Thomas said, struggling to his feet. "Indeed, but not alone." Valerian produced a small vial of luminescent blue liquid. "Restoration elixir. It will help recover your strength." As Thomas drank the bitter liquid, feeling strength flowing back into his limbs, Valerian continued. "Your father has been found and brought back to Eldamir for healing. He speaks highly of your abilities, Thomas." "He's alive?" Thomas asked, relief washing over him. "And eager to assist. He believes your combined approach, ancient knowledge with modern techniques, may be our best hope." The ground trembled beneath them, a reminder of the deteriorating threshold. "We've proven the method works," Thomas said determinedly. "Now we need to scale it up, target the source of the corruption directly. For that," Valerian said gravely, "you would need to confront Thaddeus himself. Are you prepared for such a battle?" Thomas clutched the Guardian's pendant, feeling its reassuring warmth. "I have to be, for Grandpa, for both our worlds." The council chamber had transformed into a war room. Maps and tactical displays replaced formal seating arrangements. Guardians of various ranks moved purposefully, reporting updates and receiving orders. In one corner, healers tended to Henry, whose condition had stabilized but not improved. Thomas, Elara, and Valerian presented their findings to the assembled elders. Robert joined them, his leg healed by Eldamir medicine, but still requiring a walking stick for support. "The evidence is clear," Valerian concluded after their demonstration. "The purification method works. Traditional barriers only strengthen the corruption." Eldamira studied the purified flask with reluctant wonder. "Even if we accept this approach, the scale remains problematic. How do we purify entire regions of corruption?" "We don't," Thomas replied. "We target the source, Thaddeus himself. He's channeling and directing the corruption. Stop him and we can reverse the process." "And how do you propose to find him?" Another elder challenged. "He's evaded our best trackers." Robert stepped forward. "The threshold map in the ancient archives. It shows all connections, including ones the council has forgotten. or hidden. Murmurs of discomfort rippled through the chamber at the mention of the restricted knowledge. "I've studied the map," Thomas added. "There's a pattern to the corruption spread, all emanating from a central point deep within the mountain range, accessible from both worlds." "The Nexus Cavern," Mira whispered, "but that threshold was sealed centuries ago." "Evidently not well enough," Valerian remarked dryly. After heated debate, a plan emerged. A small team would venture to the Nexus Cavern. Thomas, Robert, Elara, and 2 senior guardians. The council would coordinate defensive measures from the village, protecting civilians and maintaining what stability remained in the threshold network. Preparations moved swiftly. Thomas was outfitted with guardian gear, clothing designed to withstand threshold energies, boots that left no trace on sensitive ground, a pack containing essential supplies. Most valuable was their final acquisition, a special lantern crafted by Elara's mother, containing a flame that burned with pure threshold energy. "The light lantern reveals truth behind illusion," the artisan explained, handing it reverently to Thomas. "Thaddeus was always skilled at deception. This will show his true nature and the true path through whatever maze he's created." Thomas accepted the lantern, feeling its resonance with his pendant. The flame inside burned with a silvery blue light that seemed to shift and dance of its own accord. As the team prepared to depart, Thomas visited his grandfather. Henry's condition remained grave. The dark veins had spread across most of his visible skin, and his breathing came in labored gasps. Still, his eyes opened when Thomas approached. "You found the stone," Henry whispered. Thomas nodded. "And we figured out how to use it. We're going after Thaddeus." A ghost of a smile touched Henry's lips. "Knew you would. Always. Stubborn." His hand trembled as he reached for Thomas. "The pendant was your grandmother's. Should have given it to you sooner." "Save your strength," Thomas urged, gripping his grandfather's hand. "When we stop Thaddeus, you'll get better." "The healers said the corruption should reverse." "Be careful," Henry managed. "Thaddeus was brilliant, dangerous, but not evil. Remember that." The warning stayed with Thomas as the team departed, following the mountain paths according to the threshold map's guidance. They traveled for hours, climbing higher into the range where the air grew thin and the vegetation sparse. Signs of corruption increased as they progressed. Twisted plants with metallic leaves, small animals behaving erratically, patches of ground that seemed to absorb light. The warning stone in Thomas's pocket maintained a constant warmth, signaling perpetual danger. "We're getting close," Robert announced as they approached a sheer cliff face. "According to the map, the entrance should be here." The light lantern proved its worth immediately. When Thomas raised it, the seemingly solid rock rippled like water, revealing a narrow opening that twisted into darkness. "An illusion," Elara confirmed. "And a strong one." The passage beyond descended steeply into the mountain's heart. Ancient sigils marked the walls, not guardian symbols, but older, more primal markings that seemed to shift when viewed directly. "Threshold script," Valerian explained when Thomas inquired. "The original language of boundary maintenance, before standardized sigils." Hours of careful navigation through increasingly treacherous tunnels brought them to a vast, underground chamber. Multiple passages branched outward like spokes from a wheel. At the center stood a pool of perfectly still water that reflected the stalactites above with mirror-like precision. "The Nexus," one of the senior guardians whispered, "the point where multiple thresholds converge." "Which way now?" Elara asked, eyeing the numerous passages. Thomas consulted the threshold map, but it showed only the nexus, not the paths beyond. He raised the light lantern, letting its revealing flame illuminate each opening in turn. Most passages appeared ordinary, but one rippled under the lantern's light, similar to the cliff face entrance. Unlike the entrance, however, this illusion didn't simply hide an opening, it masked something actively moving within the tunnel. "There," Thomas indicated, keeping his voice low, "something's concealed there." The team approached cautiously. As the lantern's light touched the hidden passage, a shock wave of energy burst outward, knocking them backward. Thomas lost his grip on the map as he fell, the ancient parchment sliding across the smooth stone floor. From the previously hidden tunnel emerged a figure, tall and imposing, clothed in robes that seemed woven from shadow itself. Where his face should have been, only darkness swirled. At last the figure spoke, his voice resonating oddly as if coming from multiple directions. The Cold War legacy arrives, grandson, son, and the memory of the grandfather, all present for the culmination. Thaddeus Vaughn had found them. The team scattered as Thaddeus advanced, his every movement trailing wisps of the same black corruption that afflicted Henry. The two senior guardians moved to flank him, while Robert pulled Thomas and Elara behind a rock formation. "Remember your training," Robert whispered urgently. "Don't let him touch you directly. The corruption spreads through contact." Thaddeus made no aggressive move, merely standing by the pool at the chamber's center. "How dramatic," he commented, voice echoing strangely. "Did the council fill your head with tales of my villainy, young Thomas? Did they explain why I was banished?" "You tried to force the worlds to merge," Thomas replied, cautiously emerging from cover. Light lantern held high. "You're destroying the threshold network." "Remaking it," Thaddeus corrected. "There's a difference." In the lantern's revealing light, Thomas could see glimpses of the man beneath the corruption. An elderly face with intelligent eyes, features that might once have been kind. "The council's methods are obsolete," Thaddeus continued. "They maintain artificial boundaries between worlds that should naturally flow together. I'm simply accelerating the inevitable, while poisoning both worlds in the process," Elara countered, joining Thomas. "The fading is killing everything it touches." Thaddeus sighed, the sound distorted through the corruption. "Necessary transition pains. Once the merger is complete, a new balance will establish itself. And many will die before your new balance arrives." Robert demanded, limping forward with his walking stick. "Fewer than would perish if the thresholds collapse naturally," Thaddeus replied. "Which they will, Robert. You know this. It's why I taught you the alternative methods, to prepare for the inevitable." The corrupted guardian gestured toward the pool. Its mirror surface rippled, showing visions of both worlds, forests dying, waters stagnating, creatures sickening. "This is already happening," Thaddeus explained. "Slowly, over centuries, but accelerating. The natural degradation of separation. My methods merely control the process, directing it toward a sustainable outcome rather than chaos." Thomas felt doubt creep in. The sincerity in Thaddeus's voice was unmistakable. He truly believed he was saving both worlds, not destroying them. "There's another way," Thomas said, stepping closer despite Robert's warning gesture. "We've discovered how to purify the corruption without merging the worlds." Interest flickered across Thaddeus's partially visible features. "Impossible. I've studied every ancient text, every guardian technique." "Not every text," Thomas replied, reaching slowly into his pocket to withdraw the broken threshold stone pieces. "Some knowledge was deliberately hidden, even from the council." Recognition dawned in Thaddeus's eyes. The purification stone. Henry found it after all. A humorless laugh escaped him, and broke it, typical of his caution. "It works," Thomas insisted. "We've proven it on a small scale. The corruption can be reversed without destroying the natural boundaries." "Show me," Thaddeus challenged, gesturing to the corrupted pool. The senior guardians exchanged alarmed glances, clearly believing this was a trap. But Thomas saw an opportunity. If Thaddeus could be convinced rather than defeated, perhaps catastrophe could be averted without further bloodshed. Thomas approached the pool, Robert moving protectively at his side. He placed the threshold stone pieces at the water's edge, then knelt and touched his pendant to the surface. Immediately he sensed the concentrated corruption, far stronger than the sample in the flask. It pushed against his consciousness, seeking entry. The pendant grew hot, filtering the darkness, while the stone pieces began to glow with ancient power. Thomas channeled the purification technique, visualizing clean threshold energy flowing through him into the corrupted pool. The effort was immense, draining his strength rapidly. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he fought to maintain the flow. "It's working," Ilara reported from behind him. "The corruption is receding from the edge." Indeed, a ring of clear water had appeared around Thomas's hand, slowly expanding outward, but the strain was becoming unbearable. Thomas felt himself weakening, the corruption pushing back with unexpected force. "You can't sustain it," Thaddeus observed. "The scale is too great for one guardian, even one of dual heritage." "Then help me," Thomas gasped through gritted teeth. "If you truly want to save both worlds, help me purify rather than corrupt." Uncertainty crossed Thaddeus's features, the first genuine emotion he'd displayed. "My work of decades was well-intentioned, but misguided," Robert interjected. "You taught me to question everything, Thaddeus. Question this path now." A tremor shook the chamber, stalactites crashing down around them. The threshold network was destabilizing faster as the confrontation drew out. "There's no time," one of the senior guardians shouted. "The nexus is collapsing." In that moment of crisis, unexpected aid arrived. Henry appeared at the chamber entrance, supported by Elder Valerian, his corrupted body barely able to stand, but his eyes clear and determined. "Thaddeus," he called weakly. "Old friend, help my grandson." The address seemed to break something in Thaddeus. The corruption surrounding him rippled, momentarily revealing more of the man beneath. "Henry," he acknowledged, "still interfering after all these years. Still saving you from yourself," Henry countered with a ghost of a smile. Thomas felt his strength failing, his connection to the pool weakening. The purified area had stopped expanding, corruption pushing back against his efforts. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. Thaddeus, kneeling beside him. "Your technique is sound," the elder guardian admitted, "but your implementation is flawed. Allow me." Before anyone could react, Thaddeus placed his other hand on the guardian's pendant. Power surged through the regions, not corruption but pure threshold energy channeled with masterful precision. The pendant flared brightly, becoming the center of a web of energy that connected Thomas, Thaddeus, and the broken threshold stones. Together, Thaddeus instructed, "Direct the flow through the stones, not just your pendant." Understanding bloomed in Thomas's mind. He adjusted his technique, using the stones as amplifiers rather than merely guides. The purification accelerated dramatically, clear water spreading rapidly across the pool's surface. They had created something new, a guardian staff, formed from the combined power of the pendant, the threshold stones, and their united will. Summer sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floor. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, carefully transcribing notes from his grandfather's journal into his own. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in the Nexus cavern, and both worlds had slowly begun to heal. The purification had spread outward from the Nexus like ripples in a pond, reversing corruption throughout the threshold network. Plants regrew, animals returned to their natural behaviors, and the boundaries between worlds stabilized, not merged, but not rigidly separated either. Henry entered from the porch, moving slower than before but with steady steps. The corruption had left its mark, silver streaks in his hair, faint tracery of scars along his exposed skin, where the dark veins had been, but he was alive, recovering more each day. "Mail's here," he announced, dropping several envelopes on the table, "including a letter from your mother." Thomas set aside his journal. "What does she say?" "She'll be visiting next weekend," Henry replied, settling into a chair with a slight wince. "Your father's coming up from town to join us." That was another unexpected healing. Robert had decided to stay in the mountain community, renting a small house in town. He visited the cabin regularly, rebuilding his relationship with Henry and continuing Thomas's guardian training. "The council has approved my proposal," Henry continued, pride evident in his voice. "A formal exchange program between worlds. Limited, carefully monitored, but a start toward greater understanding. Grandfather Valerian must be pleased, Thomas remarked. The elder had become a regular visitor through the cabin threshold, eager to spend time with his human family. He's taking credit for the idea naturally, Henry chuckled. Politics are the same in both worlds. A soft humming drew Thomas's attention to the window. Outside, Alara approached along the forest path, carrying a basket covered with cloth. Since the barriers had stabilized, she had been granted permission to cross regularly as a junior guardian liaison. Just in time for lunch, Henry observed, as Thomas went to greet her. The two young guardians walked to the edge of the property, where a small garden had been planted. At its center grew a delicate silver sapling, a renewal seed from Eldermere, planted where the corruption had first appeared in their world. It's growing stronger, Alara noted, setting down her basket to examine the young tree. The roots must be deep by now, like connections between worlds, Thomas agreed. He touched the guardian's pendant, which now rarely left his neck. Its humming had become so familiar he hardly noticed it anymore. From her basket, Alara withdrew several items from Eldermere: fruits with impossible colors, a letter from Elder Valerian, and books for Thomas's growing collection of threshold knowledge. The archives have been officially opened to all guardians, she reported. Another of your grandfather's reforms that's finally been implemented. The council is slowly accepting that secrecy caused more problems than it solved. And Thaddeus? Thomas asked quietly. Alara's expression grew somber. Recovering like your grandfather. The healers say the corruption damaged him deeply, but his mind remains sharp. He's been consulting on the Threshold Restoration Project from his confinement. The fate of the former rogue guardian had been complex. His actions had caused tremendous harm, yet his knowledge and final assistance had proven crucial to saving both worlds. The council had sentenced him to confined rehabilitation rather than permanent banishment, a controversial decision that reflected the changing attitudes toward guardian justice. As they returned to the cabin, Thomas spotted a familiar blue pickup truck approaching up the gravel drive. His father had arrived early, a welcome surprise. The family gathering that afternoon was lively, Henry and Robert sharing stories from the past, Alara describing recent developments in Eldermere, Thomas recounting his progress in guardian studies. The tension that had once defined their family relationships had mellowed into something warmer, stronger. After dinner, Thomas took his father aside to show him the latest threshold readings from the instruments in the hidden room. The network is more stable than ever, he explained, and the corrupted areas continue to recover. Robert studied the data, nodding with satisfaction. Your grandmother would be proud of what you've accomplished. What we all accomplished, Thomas corrected. I couldn't have done it alone. Later, as twilight settled over the mountains, Thomas stood on the porch watching stars appear one by one. The guardian's key rested in his palm, no longer just a tool, but a symbol of responsibility accepted and understood. The door beneath the floorboards now represented not mystery and secrets, but connection and possibility. Thomas thought back to that first moment of discovery, a curious boy finding a hidden handle, unaware of how it would change his life forever. From the trees at the forest edge came a soft glow, visitors from Eldermere, right on schedule. Thomas smiled, recognizing Elder Mira leading a small group of guardian trainees for their first supervised crossing. Ready for your teaching duties? Henry asked, joining him on the porch. As ready as I'll ever be, Thomas replied. That's all anyone can ask, his grandfather said, resting a hand on his shoulder. Together they watched as the threshold guardians emerged from the forest, linking two worlds through understanding rather than division, just as Thomas himself bridged them through his dual heritage. The silver sapling in the garden caught the last light of day, its leaves shimmering with promise for the future. The door had been found, the mystery unraveled, and Thomas Coldwell, once just a boy spending summer with his grandfather, had found not only his place in the world, but his role in preserving the delicate balance between worlds that had always been his birthright.